Hi everyone, it's me, Shalina. I'm finally back with part 2 of my book review. I posted part 1 3 weeks ago, and I posted it on my Fiery Maple channel on YouTube and on my Fiery Maple page on Facebook, even though typically my book reviews go on my Boldly and Rightly YouTube channel. But it was like a crossover thing that I was doing. So anyway, finally, part 2 of this book. It's called In the Shadow of the Empress, and I will link to my part 1 review, because usually I kind of talk about a little bit about the book, why I wanted to read it, and who the author is, and things like that. So I'm not going to go through all that. I'm just going to jump in. Oh, but if you don't mind, I would love if you would follow the link and then like and subscribe on YouTube, because that helps me out, because I'm trying to grow the channel. And I think I only have like 4 subscribers right now on YouTube. But anyway, In the Shadow of the Empress, the defiant lives of Maria Theresa, mother of Marie Antoinette, and her daughters. So this book is a book about Empress Maria Theresa. She was the only empress of the Austrian Empire, and she really did a magnificent job. I really enjoyed reading about her. I definitely recommend the book. And I just wanted to share kind of like 2 little anecdotes that I thought were interesting, and kind of cemented why I love reading history, because it's just so informative about what goes on today. It's just like, what's that famous quote about not get, like, oh no, I don't know what it is, but basically it's saying like, no, you don't get over things, because history isn't even in the past. Like it's current, it's present. So anyway, Maria Theresa, one of the things she did, which I thought was really remarkable, is she completely restructured the way education, the military, finance worked in her country. So she ruled in the 1700s. She was born in 1717, and she decided that she needed a standing army. At the time, Austria did not have a standing army, but because Frederick the Great, she had a nemesis, his name was Frederick the Great. He's my second antidote. We'll talk a little bit about him. Was wreaking havoc all over Europe, was constantly harassing her, even though, of course, these people, it's like the same family. They're distantly related. And his godfather, Frederick the Great's godfather, was actually her father, the former, his name was King Charles. Her father was King Charles. He was the Holy Roman Emperor. He preceded her, and he was the godfather of Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great was causing all sorts of problems for the Austrian Empire, so she decided, I need a standing army. She was very smart, and she did not want to go in debt and to have a standing army, and she was like, well, how can we pay for this? So one of her advisors, his name was Count Haugwitz, recommended that she tax the nobles and tax the church. I love what Nancy Gladstone, who happens to be the author of this book, said about this. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. She says, the radical nature of Haugwitz's proposal cannot be overstated. For as long as anyone could remember, certainly for at least the last 500 or 600 years, the landed aristocracy and the priesthood had been exempted from paying taxes. Peasants, though, represented the least wealthy segment of the population, were nonetheless primarily responsible for satisfying the demands of the royal tithe collector. My goodness, that's what peasants were for. Same today. That's what peasants are for. We're paying all the taxes. And it's like, oh, am I a peasant? Are you a peasant? I'll let you know really easy. Are you in the top 1%? No? You're a peasant. I mean, honestly, that's basically what it is. Corporations don't pay taxes, as we know. Rich people don't pay taxes. It's the middle class, and to a larger extent, I would say maybe the upper middle class. But things haven't changed much, have they? And we know the church still does not pay taxes, at least not in America. Not really sure what they're doing in Austria, but they fought her really hard, the nobility. But they lost, and they had to pay their taxes, and she then created a standing army. Not only did she do that, but like I said, she re-engineered the educational system, the finance system of the country, and she completely restructured the military operations, the way they recruited, the way they trained, like everything. And I also like that, like, so at the time, Vienna Hospital, they averaged like 600 deliveries of babies a year, and they averaged only 20 survivors. So she thought, I mean, horrible. She was right. She's like, this is a horrifying record, and clearly we need to do something about our med school education. So what she did is she decided to get start a boarding school, and she opened it up to not just the wealthiest and the nobility, but she opened it up also to the landed gentry. And she said, I think it'd be great for the realm if we had educated people. So, and not just the super rich be educated. The other thing, and in fact, they said that all of her reforms really started paying dividends, and that even her enemies were impressed with it. And even Frederick the Great had to say this about her, which I thought was kind of nice. He said, by these various cures, the army acquired a degree of perfection before unknown under the emperors of the House of Austria, and a woman executed plans worthy of a man of genius. I mean, honestly, it's not surprising. And if more women could rule more things, then more people would realize what genius we have inside of us. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting. Now let's talk about Mr. Frederick the Great. Well, he wasn't always called Frederick the Great. That was the name given to him by history. He is now considered, they call him a great. They say he was a great emperor, a great ruler, that he was, a brilliant military tactician and strategist, and now he's kind of held up as like the ideal, German, Prussian, like of discipline and strategy and all of those ideals. But he had a rough childhood. So his father, Frederick I, was an alcoholic and was horribly abusive to him, like unimaginably abusive. His father was known to be very, very frugal. In fact, he was so frugal that oftentimes his family went hungry. I mean, can you imagine you're a sovereign, you're a king, you have lots of riches at your disposal, and you are so tight-fisted that sometimes your own family goes to bed hungry. What a nutter. But he was very austere. He did not believe in flamboyance or ostentatious displays of wealth. And he really wasn't into culture and art and music and things like that. And Frederick just was. His son was kind of flamboyant. He was really into fashion and French culture. He was kind of a dandy. And he really was not interested in what can be considered typical masculine pursuits at the time. Like, he didn't like to hunt. He didn't want to go hunting. He wasn't into the military. He just wasn't into those things. He was into music and dancing and fashion. So, good Lord. And his father was not like that. His father, now interesting, his father did not hold a mistress, wasn't really into, mistresses and concubines and things like that, even though that was the norm for that time period for sovereigns. And his father clearly wasn't into riches and things like that. His father was basically into the military, and specifically into, I remember reading this other book when I was a kid about this, about all these weird monarchs. He was into creating this super tall army. He wanted an army of men who were over 6 feet. So much, in fact, that he would even go around kidnapping tall people from other countries. And he would also get other sovereigns to send him tall men for his army. And in this one case, I remember they kidnapped this guy and they put him in like a box, and they didn't have enough like ear holes for him, and he suffocated to death. And so then when he got to Prussia and they opened the box, he was dead. Anyway, Frederick the Great's father was a little bit of a nutter, and one day when Frederick was 16 years old, he walked in on him prancing around in this like beautiful red robe trimmed in gold, and his father freaked out. He shaved his hair. He took the robe, threw it in the fire. He took a string from the curtains and started strangling him, and he probably would have strangled him to death, except for a servant walked in and like stopped him. He was very upset that Frederick was into fashion, and what did he say to him? Oh, I can't find it. But anyway, from then on, his father was even more abusive to him after he found him in that red robe and, I think he was playing a lute or something with his best friend. So for 2 years, his father was just completely terrible to him. So around 18 years old, he decided that he was going to flee with his best friend. His name was Lieutenant Kate, I think. I don't know how to pronounce it. And they said they were going to make a dash for the border together. And they were leaving all this behind. But his father found out about it. His father did not let him know he found out about it. Instead, his father let him try to escape. And when he was close to escaping, he had the authorities arrest him and his best friend, this lieutenant that he was escaping with. His father threw him and his best friend in jail. Prison, actually. Threw him in prison. And like Nancy Gladstone, the author, says, she says, what followed is one of the most terrible acts of vengeance ever perpetuated on a child by a parent. He had him court-martialed. He had them both court-martialed. He had them found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. So that was on November 1st. On November 6th, Frederick, who was 18 at the time, was informed that one of the executions was going to take place. So him and his best friend and his lover, historians say that it was his lover, were dragged out, to the block, and he didn't know which one was going to be killed. But when it became clear that his best friend, his lover, the person he tried to escape with, was going to be killed, he said he would abdicate his throne. He said, please kill me instead. I mean, he was just completely freaking out. Nothing he could say would stop his father. And his father had his head chopped off right in front of him, and his head rolled towards Frederick, and then Frederick just fainted. Who does this to their children? Terrible. So anyway, his father was still not happy. He was saying, I still think we need to execute Frederick. I don't really want him. I can have his brother be the heir. And he really thought it was an opportunity to get rid of his son, so his younger brother, who he preferred to ascend the throne, would have it. Guess who saved Frederick? His godfather, Charles, who happens to be Maria Theresa's father, saved him and intervened and saved his life. And what's so crazy about this is Maria Theresa's father saved him, and then when Frederick became an emperor himself, he spent most of his time harassing her and her empire and making war and reneging on treaties and just wreaking havoc all over Europe. And so basically, this episode scarred him for life. After that, I think he had to stay in jail for another year. But when he saw his father again, he was a completely changed person. He completely remade himself, or pretended to remake himself. He was into hunting. He was into doing whatever his father told him to do. He was into the military. He was more interested in his regiment after that, and he remade himself into this image of this masculine military tactician. And I just thought this is just one of those lessons where you cannot, most historians believe that one of the reasons why Frederick's father was so horrified and disgusted by him and his effeminate nature is that his father was actually gay as well. And that's why he never held a mistress, and that's why he spent most of his time in the company of men, and they think he also had a lover. So because of his self-loathing, he abused and harassed and completely was awful to his son and almost killed him. And then because of that, his son grows up to be a menace of Europe. you cannot. I mean, it's one thing not to love yourself, but you certainly, I think the lesson is, cannot be a self-loathing person, because you just wreak havoc in your life and the life of other people. So I'm looking at you, Frederick I and Frederick the Great, and also Hitler, who most historians say had Jewish ancestry. We see, but he loathed it. What havoc he wrought. And then I'm also thinking about Edgar Hoover, you know, the first FBI, first head of the FBI, who was terrible, terrible, terrible to black people. And it's commonly known in Louisiana and the South that Edgar Hoover is black and had black ancestry. And that was part of his problem. And why he was so scorched earth on black people. But anyway, I recommend this book. You should read it. It's very interesting. It's just a tiny, tiny snippet. It's funny, I talked more about Frederick the Great than I did Maria Theresa, but she was fascinating, and her daughters were fascinating. Not just Marie Antoinette, but she had other daughters who ruled in their own right and who were just remarkable. So anyway, you should read that book. And I would love to know if you have any recommendations on biographies or historical fiction that you think I should read. See you next week. Well, I don't know if we won't be talking about a book next week, but next week there will be some sort of Tuesday Talks on Fiery Maple. Hope you have a good one. Bye.